Natron's muscular high steps and relentless drive to the end zone rejuvenated the running game. At 245 pounds, Means is a lethal combination of strength and speed.
So just to clarify, the title of this video is meant as a complete compliment, because Natrone Means had no business being that nimble on his feet, but Natron means business. And that was clear every time he touched the ball in his short-lived prime. He could have just tried to run through everyone, and while he would make sure people felt him, he had a level of patience and quickness not often seen in a back his size. And although he was pushing 250 pounds, it wasn't unusual to see him outrun the defense. He was a stud at North Carolina as one of the best players in program history, then quickly became one of the NFL's best young backs in San Diego, helping lead them to a Super Bowl appearance in just his second year. But then weight and injury issues began plaguing him, and he could never recapture that form. But he would later give Jaguars fans a memorable playoff stretch and was looking like a Pro Bowler in a return to San Diego before breaking his foot, which kicked off career-derailing injuries, as he was out of the league at just 28 years old. And while he has become largely forgotten due to his injury woes and LaDainian Tomlinson's arrival soon after he left San Diego, there was no question that a healthy and motivated Natrone Means was one of the best to run the football. Let's jog your memory. A North Carolina native, Natrone Means' first football experience came as an O-lineman, as he didn't meet the weight requirements of his Pee-wee football coach to run the ball, even though other players got preferential treatment. But once that same coach saw Means run in practice, it was clear that he was a running back. By the time high school rolled around, Means would attend Central Cabarrus, where he was relegated to JV as a freshman. But that didn't even last the whole season, as he was called up to varsity to help the team make a playoff run. He stayed at varsity as a sophomore, but played mostly cornerback, while getting some opportunity at tailback and making the most of it. And while the team lost again in the playoffs, Means was getting plenty of attention from colleges. He was a local star after his junior season, but he set himself apart in a game versus regional rival Salisbury during his senior year, when he took a sweep 75 yards for a touchdown, while outrunning 3 defenders. But these weren't just any defenders. They were 3/4 of the state championship winning relay team, and his overall stats as a senior saw him rush for 2,300 yards and 33 touchdowns, even though he played in the second half in just 2 games, usually single-handedly putting games out of reach in the first half. But Central Cabarrus would again fall short of a state championship. And when it came to college, Means always knew where he wanted to go, as he was a huge Dick Crum and UNC fan. And even though Crum was let go during his high school years, he hit it off with new head coach Mark Brunell. So come 1990, Means would be running the ball at Chapel Hill, and they needed all the help they could get after back-to-back 1-10 seasons. As a freshman, it didn't seem like Means would have a big role, with UNC already featuring running backs Randy Jordan and Eric Blunt. But after Means ran through linebacker Tommy Thigpen in a goal line drill, Thigpen took out his frustration the next play on Jordan, with Jordan suffering a season-ending injury, and thus opening the door for Means. And it also helped that UNC had a passing offense that scored just 4 touchdowns all season. Means would score his first touchdown of the year in a win over UConn. Then after the running back by committee approach that UNC had been using for the first half of the season wasn't working, Means would get the start for a game against Wake Forest, and never looked back, going for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns, as the starting job was his for good. And Means would not only lead the Tar Heels in rushing, he would also finish second in receptions, and would lead the ACC in touchdowns. And although the Tar Heels didn't get a bowl game bid, Means would treat the ACC finale versus Duke as a bowl game, as he capped off a great freshman year with 256 yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over the Blue Devils, with the Tar Heels ending the year with a 6-4-1 record, and Means finishing his season with 849 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns, while adding 24 receptions for 229 yards and another touchdown. Even though Jordan was back in '91, Means was the clear-cut starter, and the Tar Heels would rely on the running game this year, as they didn't have a lot of stability at quarterback, with 3 different QBs throwing for touchdowns, but none of them throwing for more than 4. In fact, Means alone would rush for more touchdowns than the Tar Heels threw, as he led the ACC in that category, as well as rushing, and once again showed his ability to catch out of the backfield, as he was second on the team in receptions, After a 2-0 start, which led to UNC being ranked in the top 25, they would be dominated by rival NC State and never be able to re-enter the top 25, as they would go 3-3 after this loss, but would end the season strong, as Means ran for a touchdown and set up the go-ahead touchdown on a big run versus South Carolina in the second last game of the season, as the Tar Heels beat the Gamecocks for the first time in 4 years. Then they wrapped up their season with another win over Duke, which saw Means go for 181 yards on the ground, and the team finishing at 7-4, as Means wrapped up a first-team All-ACC campaign with 1,030 yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground, while adding 23 catches for 178 more yards through the air. 1992 would be the most successful season of North Carolina football in a decade, and Means deserved a lot of credit for that. The Tar Heels had two capable quarterbacks in Jason Stanisic and Mike Thomas, but all that mattered was if they could hand it off to Means, as he would finish second in the ACC in rushing yards on a career-high total, and his career-high in touchdowns would also lead the conference, as he would earn another first-team all-conference selection. And UNC featured an offense and a defense in the top half of the nation, as they got out to a 3-0 start. But once again, NC State would get the best of them to hand them their first loss of the year. Then Means would go for 2 touchdowns in a win over Navy the following week, before UNC lost to a great Florida State team. But after this, they would get wins over ranked opponents in Virginia and Georgia Tech, with Means rushing for 216 yards against Virginia and 121 against Georgia Tech. Then the next week against Maryland, he rushed for 249 yards, before their 3-game win streak was snapped in a loss to Clemson. And for the third straight year, they would defeat Duke in the ACC finale. But their season wasn't over, as with the team boasting a 9-3 record as the number 21 ranked team in the nation, they got a bid to play Mississippi State in the Peach Bowl. And after falling behind 14-0 in the first half, UNC would come back in the second to win the game 21-17 to end their season on a high note, with Means' year seeing him rush for 1,195 yards and 13 touchdowns, while adding 14 receptions for 93 more yards. So Means had came in as a standout freshman and only improved with each passing year. And even though he had a year of eligibility left, he felt he was ready for the next level, as he would declare for the 1993 NFL Draft. Means was taken in the second round by the San Diego Chargers, and once again found himself in a talented but crowded backfield, as along with him, the Chargers featured another powerful back in Marion Butts, and one of the league's best pass catchers out of the backfield in Ronnie Harmon, with the team also boasting a great receiver in Anthony Miller. And their defense was up to par with their offense, with dominant linebacker Junior Seau and star defensive end Leslie O'Neal. So it wasn't surprising that the Chargers were coming off a divisional championship season where they lost to Miami in the playoffs. And even though Means wouldn't start a single game this year, he would quickly prove his value, as he would be the team's second leading rusher while leading the team in rushing touchdowns by a large margin. As while he had the size and physicality to be a power back, he could also get the edge with a surprising quickness and speed. Over his first 6 games, he hadn't gotten a lot of opportunity, but he played well in a Week 9 win over the Raiders, then broke out the following week versus the Vikings with his first career 100-yard game, before seeing less usage over the next few weeks. But he had his best performance in the second last week of the season, running for 118 yards and 3 touchdowns in a blowout win over Miami. But the Chargers regressed from last year, only winning 8 games, which wouldn't be enough for the playoffs, as Means' rookie season ended with him rushing for 645 yards and 8 touchdowns, while adding 10 catches for 59 more yards. During the offseason, with the Chargers worried about cap space, they would trade away Butts, opening up a bigger role for Means in the backfield, and he came back in year 2 on a mission. Another player who the Chargers decided against re-signing was Anthony Miller. So with their best receiver gone, it was natural for them to rely on the run game more, and Means proved to be a capable workhorse, as he would finish top 5 in the NFL in rush attempts, rushing yards, and touchdowns. And it was almost guaranteed that Means was going to find the end zone in each game over the first half of the season, as his first 6 games would see him score at least 1 touchdown in each of them, with the Chargers going 6-0 in that time, with one of his most impressive touchdowns coming in the second quarter of a Week 6 win over the Chiefs. As although it was only a 9-yard score, Means had accounted for all 57 of the Chargers' yards on that drive, finishing with 125 yards for the game. Then the following week, he went for 120 on the ground and 3 touchdowns in the first half versus New Orleans, as after 6 games, he had 8 scores. And although he only got in the end zone one more time over his next 3, his 100-yard rushing streak would reach 5 games. But after his hot start, Means became the focus of every team's game plan, as over the rest of the season, he would fail to have another 100-yard game, and would only record 4 more touchdowns. But he would end the season strong with 85 yards and 2 touchdowns in a Week 17 win over Pittsburgh, marking San Diego's 11th win of the season, as they would win the AFC West and get a divisional round matchup with Miami. And Means came to play. Means would have a great rushing day, averaging over 5 yards per carry, but the Dolphins were up 21-6 at halftime. Yet the second half would see Means break off his longest run of 24 yards to get in the end zone and bring the Chargers within 6. Then the Chargers would score the game winner in the fourth quarter to knock off the Dolphins as Means rushed for 139 yards while adding 16 yards through the air. The AFC Championship brought the Steelers, and while Means would have some good runs, the Steelers' defense did a much better job slowing him down, as although he had 69 yards, it took him 20 carries to get it. But San Diego again came back from a second-half deficit to win the game and head to their first Super Bowl in franchise history. But the Cinderella season would come to an end, as Steve Young, Jerry Rice, and Ricky Watters would dominate the Chargers' defense, putting up 49 points. And although Means had just 33 yards on the ground, he did score a touchdown, making him the youngest player to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl at that time, at just 22 years old. And while San Diego's season ended on a sour note, Means played one more game, as he would suit up for the AFC in the Pro Bowl the following week, with his breakout season seeing him rush for 1,350 yards and 12 touchdowns, while adding 39 catches for 235 more yards through the air. But while it looked like the Chargers had found their back of the future, unbeknownst to everyone, they had already seen the best of Natrone Means. Means had 2 years remaining on his rookie deal, but after a season like he just had, he wanted a more lucrative extension and would stage a holdout going into the 95 season. The Chargers had offered a 4-year, $7.1 million deal, but Means would not sign it, due to feeling that the final 3 years were unacceptable, with Means seeking a deal worth nearly $10 million more. And while his holdout would end after just 12 days, it was only because he didn't want to lose out on a year towards unrestricted free agency. So Means was unhappy and felt betrayed by the Chargers front office, but he would eventually agree on a 4-year, $7.3 million deal, with the expectation that if he performed well this season, the contract would be renegotiated going into 96. But it wasn't looking great when Means reported to camp 15 pounds overweight. But even an out-of-shape Means showed he was one of the best backs in the NFL, as after a 60-yard performance in a loss versus Oakland in the season opener, he rushed for over 350 yards over his next 3, and finally found the end zone in a Week 4 win over Denver, as San Diego had won all 3. Then he would have at least 90 yards in 3 of his next 4 games, while scoring 3 more touchdowns. But then in a Week 10 loss to Miami, Means, who at the time was the AFC's leading rusher, went down with a groin injury, and the recovery time was longer than expected, as he would miss 5 weeks, then would return briefly in Week 16 versus Indianapolis, before sitting out the season finale, as the Chargers went 9-7 and got a wild card spot to take on the Colts. But Means would play sparingly, with 11 yards on 6 carries, as the Chargers lost, with Means' shortened year seeing him rush for 730 yards and 5 touchdowns, while adding 7 catches for 46 more yards. But big changes were coming for Means and the Chargers very soon. Less than 2 months after their playoff exit, Means got the call from his agent, saying that the Chargers were planning to release him, as San Diego was worried about Means' commitment to his conditioning and were fearing that he would stage another holdout. So just like that, Means didn't have a team going into 96, but he was still a couple months from his 24th birthday, so it was clear someone would pick him up. And just 11 days later, a Jacksonville JAguars team in their second year of existence claimed the big-bodied back. But there were still concerns, as it was no secret that Means had not gotten along with no-nonsense coach Bobby Ross in San Diego, and Jags head coach Tom Coughlin didn't exactly have a reputation as a lenient guy. But according to Means, he and Coughlin found a way to coexist. But it wasn't smooth sailing to begin his Jags tenure, as in the preseason, he again struggled with his weight and injured his thumb, losing out on the role of lead back to James Stewart. But the Jaguars had everything they needed on offense, featuring quarterback Mark Brunell and their new receiver duo of Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardell. But Means wouldn't even make his debut until Week 3, and over his first 10 games, he rushed for less than 200 yards with a single touchdown. But then Stewart went down with a turf toe injury, as Means became the starter for the final 4 games of the year, and was recapturing his form, as he would go for 56 yards versus the Bengals, then 67 yards and 2 touchdowns versus Houston. After that, he would have 92 yards versus Seattle, as the Jaguars were 8-7 in the middle of a 4-game win streak, and needed to win their final game of the season versus Atlanta to make their first playoff appearance in franchise history. And Means would turn in his only 100-yard game of the season, as he helped the Jags control the ball with 112 yards on 27 carries. And Jacksonville would win a nail-biter after a botched game-winning field goal from Atlanta, as the Jags were heading to the postseason, but Means was just getting started. The wildcard round brought the Bills, and Means and the Jags went into Buffalo and shocked everyone. Means had the greatest game of his career, as he rushed the ball 31 times for a career-high 175 yards, which included a 62-yard run that led to a Jags field goal in the first quarter, then an improbable 30-yard touchdown in the second quarter, where Means turned nothing into something.
Means. Smith stuffed him, he got away. Natron Means. Touchdown.
And Means would also convert a crucial 4th and 1 late in the game, which led to Jacksonville scoring what ended up being the difference maker, as the Jags won by 3 and were heading to the divisional round versus John Elway and the Denver Broncos. And no one was giving Jacksonville a chance. And even though Denver got out to a 12-0 lead, Means got going and was running through Denver's top-ranked rushing defense to the tune of 140 yards, while being the first Jaguar to get in the end zone this game after an 8-yard score in the second quarter, as Jacksonville shocked the football world and were heading to the AFC Championship in year 2. Unfortunately, the Natron bomb was defused in the conference title game versus New England, as he managed just 43 yards on 19 carries in a 20-6 loss. But Means had shown that he still had it, in a season which saw him rush for 507 yards and 2 touchdowns, while adding 7 catches for 45 yards and another touchdown. 1997 would see Means act as the primary starter for the team and rush for his highest total since his Pro Bowl year, as he and Stewart would combine for nearly 1,400 yards on the ground and 17 touchdowns, as Means would finish top 10 in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. But he wasn't putting up great numbers over the first half of the season, as he would rush for less than 350 yards on a little better than 3 yards per carry over the first 7 weeks of the year, yet did start the year with 4 touchdowns in the first 3 games. He would then sit out 2 weeks before coming back to James Stewart having taken his starting spot, but he would again get the starting nod in a Week 13 game versus Cincy and have his best game of the season with 96 yards and a touchdown, marking his 3rd of 4 straight games with a score. But overall, it wasn't what the Jags were expecting. As well, he did find the end zone with little issue. He failed to record a 100-yard rushing game all season, but Brunell had 2 legit stars to throw the ball to. So with one of the league's most dangerous aerial attacks, the Jags turned in an 11-5 record and faced off with Denver in the wild card. But it was a completely different story, as Denver ran all over the Jaguars' defense, racking up over 300 yards on the ground, with Means acting as the Jags' leading rusher, yet only managing 40 yards. However, he would score the Jags' only offensive touchdown in a blowout loss, with Means' year seeing him rush for 823 yards and 9 touchdowns, while adding 104 yards on 15 catches through the air. But after just 2 years, the Jags would move on from Means, yet he would end up in an unexpected place. Means was an unrestricted free agent after the season and would sign with San Diego, getting a contract closer to what he wanted from them just a few years earlier, as he would be getting about $19 million over 6 years. The Chargers had gone downhill since Means left, as they hadn't had a winning season since '95 or a 1,000-yard rusher since Means in '94, and had recently selected quarterback Ryan Leaf with the 2nd overall pick. But Means was looking really good in his return to the Chargers, as with the Chargers boasting one of the league's worst passing attacks, they put their offense on Means' shoulders, and in just the 3rd game of the year, he ran all over Kansas City for a season-high 165 yards. Then from Week 5 through Week 8, he put up over 500 yards from scrimmage, while scoring 3 touchdowns. But then just 2 weeks later versus the Ravens, Means suffered a broken foot, which would end his great season, as although the Chargers were only 4-6 after that Ravens game, they went 1-5 without Means the rest of the way, to finish at 5-11 and miss the playoffs. As Means' shortened year had seen him rush for 883 yards and 5 touchdowns, while adding 16 catches for 91 more yards. but his broken foot would be foreshadowing, as injuries would engulf the remainder of Means' career. Means was a starter in Week 1, but was banged up with knee and ankle issues. However, he still went for 79 yards on the ground and a receiving touchdown, then would score a touchdown in each of his next 2 games. He would sit out a Week 5 matchup with Detroit, then manage just 35 yards the next week versus Seattle. But in Week 7 versus Green Bay, he suffered torn cartilage in his knee a few minutes into the game, yet continued to play, but would finish with just 28 yards. However, he would undergo surgery to repair his knee after this, and would miss the next 6 weeks. And then after returning for 2 games, he was shut down for the season due to lingering issues with his knee and ankle, for a Chargers team who finished with an 8-8 record and missed the playoffs, with Means' season seeing him rush for 277 yards and 4 touchdowns, while adding 9 catches for 51 yards and another touchdown. A few months after the season, the Chargers would release Means, and he would eventually sign a 1-year deal with his home state Carolina Panthers. But it wouldn't be the homecoming he expected, as he spent most of the first half of the season recovering from off-season knee surgery, and would only be active in a Week 6 game versus Seattle, where he would only play on special teams, before the Panthers released him in late October, as he had not received a single carry or even offensive snap in his half season with Carolina. And this would mark an uneventful end to Means' career, as he would retire shortly after. But he did find a second career in coaching a few years afterwards, and has most recently worked his way into a spot with his alma mater. Natrone Means is one of many great NFL players who come and go in the blink of an eye. It's a physical sport, and he was a physical runner. And although injuries derailed his career quickly, when he was on, he was a unique and extremely talented player, and was the offensive focal point of the most successful team season in San Diego Chargers history. He's responsible for 2 of the best postseasons from a running back throughout the 90s, and really looked like he was going to redeem himself with his second stint in San Diego. But the injuries came hard and fast, and next thing you knew, he was out of the league. But when he was healthy, he could give you whatever you needed, whether it was tough yards up the middle or a big gain on the outside. And even at his size, he had the footwork and soft enough hands to be effective in the passing game, as there was really nothing Natrone Means couldn't do at the halfback position. And while he is more of a what-if in NFL history, it's because when he was healthy, he lived up to one of his many nicknames, Natrone Means Business. But that's it for today's episode on Natrone Means. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Jaguars teammates, or this one on another running back he played against in the Super Bowl. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.